The hydraulic lift hissed as it lowered the rusted chassis of the hauler to the concrete floor. Dale Kessler wiped his hands on a rag that had been gray 3 weeks ago and was now entirely black. The air in the garage was hot, stagnant, and smelled of ozone and old coolant. Outside, the twin suns of the colony had set hours ago, leaving the desert of Terra Nova cooling rapidly under the vast star-streaked sky. Dale looked at the wall chronometer. It was 2 in the morning. He tossed the rag onto his workbench and sighed. The silence of the house attached to the garage usually comforted him, but tonight it felt heavy. It had been 4 years since the shuttle crash that took Sarah, and the silence had changed texture over time. At first, it was sharp and screaming. Now, it was just a dull, heavy blanket that smelled of machine oil and bachelor living. He walked to the interior door and keyed the pad. The lights in the kitchen were off. He moved down the hallway to the girls' rooms. Empty. Both of them. Dale felt that familiar spike of adrenaline, the one that had become his constant companion since Casey turned 16 and Juna turned 14. He checked their beds. The pillows were stuffed under the blankets in a shape that might fool a casual glance. But Dale was a mechanic. He noticed details. He noticed the absence of mass, the lack of breathing rhythm. He went back to the garage, his boots heavy on the concrete. He checked the inventory logs on his datapad. The maglev truck was there. The loader was there. The vintage military sky bike he had been restoring for a client in Sector 7 was gone. Dale rubbed his temples. Casey was 17 now, driving with a learner's permit that had been suspended twice for reckless velocity. Juna was 15 and had enough attitude to fuel a starship. They had taken a military-grade recon vehicle out into the Dune Sea in the middle of the night. He grabbed his jacket and the keys to the heavy loader. He did not need a tracker to find them. He knew exactly where they went. They always went to the ridge overlooking the debris fields, where the teenagers of the colony drank synthesized beer and raced engines that were too powerful for their own good. He was going to ground them until they were 30. Out in the deep desert, the wind was not silent. It howled through the canyons of red rock, kicking up sand that scoured the paint off anything moving faster than a walk. Casey leaned forward over the handlebars of the stolen sky bike, her goggles pressed tight against her face. The engine screamed beneath her, a high-pitched whine that vibrated in her teeth. Juna was clinging to her waist, shouting something lost to the wind. Casey checked the speedometer, 200 kilometers per hour. The ground was a blur of gray and ochre beneath them. She felt alive. She felt like the main character in one of those old vid streams her dad watched when he thought they were asleep. Then the sensor array on the dashboard lit up red. It was not a proximity alarm for a rock or a cliff. It was a lock-on warning. Casey shouted back to her sister. "Someone is following us." Juna turned her head, her hair whipping violently in the slipstream. Behind them, a single dark shape cut through the moonlight. It was not a patrol skiff. It was smooth, silent, and shaped like a teardrop, a drone. But not the clunky security drones the colony used. This was high-end corporate tech, or maybe something worse. Casey banked hard to the left, diving into a narrow ravine. The sky bike groaned, the stabilizers fighting the sudden shift in gravity. The drone matched the turn instantly, losing no speed. Casey pushed the throttle to the stop. The engine temperature gauge spiked. She did not care. She just wanted to lose an eye in the sky. She pulled up, cresting a dune, and the bike went airborne. For a second, they were flying. Then gravity reclaimed them. The landing was rough. The front repulsor coil clipped a jagged piece of buried scrap metal. The bike bucked, spun, and slammed sideways into a drift of soft sand. Silence returned to the desert. save for the hissing of the overheated engine. Casey groaned, spitting sand. She checked her limbs, nothing broken. She looked over at Juna, who was already scrambling up, dusting off her jacket. They were shaken, but the crash foam had done its job. Casey looked up at the sky. The drone was gone. It had either lost them or lost interest. She kicked the side of the bike. "Dad is going to kill us." Juna ignored her. She was looking at the thing they had hit. It was not just scrap metal. The crash had dislodged a massive amount of sand, revealing a smooth, curved surface buried in the dune. Juna walked toward it. It looked like a coffin, or maybe a stasis pod. It was made of a material that looked like liquid mercury frozen in time. There were no seams, no rivets, no welding marks. Casey walked over, limping slightly. She told Juna to stay back. Juna reached out and touched the surface. A hum resonated through the ground, deep enough to rattle their teeth. The smooth metal split open down the center, retracting with a wet, organic sound. Inside lay a girl. She looked human, but only if you squinted. She was tall, slender, and wearing armor that looked like it had been grown rather than forged. Her skin was the color of polished moonlight, shimmering with a faint iridescence. Across her ribs, visible through the tears in her bodysuit, glowing violet tattoos pulsed in rhythm with a slow, shallow heartbeat. Her face was sharp, terrified even in sleep, and utterly beautiful. Casey whispered that she looked like a princess. Juna pointed to the girl's side. Dark blue blood was pooling there. She was hurt. Casey looked at the sky bike. The repulsor was bent, but the engine was still running. They could limp home. If they left her here, the desert cold would kill her in an hour, or that drone would come back. Casey swore under her breath. She grabbed the alien girl's shoulders. Juna grabbed her feet. She was surprisingly heavy, dense with muscle and bone density that felt wrong for her size. They dragged her to the bike, draping her unconscious body over the fuel tank between them. Casey gunned the engine. The bike listed to the right, sparking against the sand, but it moved. They turned back toward the lights of the outpost, carrying a fugitive that would change the orbit of their entire lives. Dale was just opening the bay doors to take the loader out when he heard the whining sputter of a damaged repulsor engine. He froze. He knew that sound. It was the death rattle of a very expensive piece of military hardware. He stood in the center of the garage, arms crossed, his face set in a mask of impending doom. The sky bike limped into the bay, hovering barely 6 inches off the ground, trailing smoke. Casey killed the engine, and the machine dropped to the concrete with a clatter that made Dale wince. He opened his mouth to unleash a lecture that had been brewing for 2 hours. But the words died in his throat. The girls were not alone. Casey and Juna were frantically trying to untangle themselves from a third figure slumped over the chassis. At first, Dale thought they had hit someone. He rushed forward, his anger instantly replaced by the mechanic's panic. He helped them pull the body off the bike. As the figure rolled into his arms, Dale stopped. He looked down at the face resting against his shoulder. He saw the silver skin. He saw the strange, elongated tips of her ears. He saw the violet light pulsing beneath her skin. He looked at Casey. Casey wiped grease from her forehead and said they found her in the desert. She said they crashed, and she was just there, buried in the sand. Dale looked at the alien. This was not a local species. This was not even a species he had seen on the trade manifests. This was something from the core worlds, or beyond. The armor she wore was worth more than his entire shop. He told them to clear the workbench. They swept the tools aside, and Dale laid the stranger down on the metal surface. He grabbed a diagnostic scanner, but before he could turn it on, The alien gasped. Her eyes snapped open. They were not human eyes. They were solid violets, swirling like nebulas with no whites and no pupils. They flashed like twin stars. She moved faster than anything organic should move. One moment she was supine. The next, she had launched herself off the table. She collided with Dale, her hand clamping around his throat. The force of the impact drove him back into the tool rack. Wrenches and hydro spanners clattered to the floor. Her grip was like a hydraulic clamp. Dale choked, grabbing at her wrist, but it was immovable. The air in the garage suddenly grew heavy with static. The lights overhead flickered and burst. The diagnostic screens on the wall sparked and went dark. A wave of invisible pressure expanded from the girl's body, shorting out every unshielded circuit in a 10-meter radius. Casey screamed. Juna grabbed a heavy pipe wrench and raised it. Dale wheezed, trying to tell Juna to stop, but he could not breathe. The alien girl looked at him, her eyes wide with panic and confusion. She was speaking, but the words were a garbled, melodic syntax that sounded like glass breaking. She tightened her grip. Dale's vision began to spot. Then, just as quickly as the surge had begun, it vanished. The violet light in her eyes dimmed. Her hand went slack. She collapsed forward, her forehead hitting Dale's chest as she slid down to the floor, unconscious once more. Dale gasped, sucking in air. He rubbed his throat. The shop was dark, lit only by the emergency amber lights that ran on a separate chemical battery loop. Casey asked if he was okay. Dale coughed and nodded. He looked down at the heap of silver and armor on his floor. He told them to help him. They needed to get her into the shielded recovery pod. The recovery pod was a relic from the war, a lead-lined medical unit Dale had bought for parts and ended up restoring. It was the only thing in the shop that could contain whatever energy that girl was leaking. They lifted her again, straining under the dense weight, and placed her inside the glass and steel cylinder. Dale sealed the lid. The internal sensors of the pod flared to life, isolated from the shop's fried grid. Dale leaned against the pod, staring through the glass at the sleeping face. He touched his throat. He could still feel the imprint of her fingers. He looked at his daughters. They were huddled together, looking terrified and defiant and young. Dale let out a long, ragged breath. He looked at the alien, then at the wrecked sky bike, then at his daughters. He spoke, his voice raspy. "So let me get this straight. You crashed a sky bike and brought home an alien princess. And now the lonely mechanic is supposed to fix her spaceship and maybe find love again?" Casey blinked. She looked at Juna. They both looked at their father. Dale rubbed his face. He told them that was a joke, a bad one. He turned back to the pod. The bio readouts were scrolling on the small screen. Her heart rate was 300 beats per minute. Her blood oxygen was efficient, far better than human. But there was an anomaly. Dale tapped the glass. There was a foreign object embedded near her spine. He told Casey to get the surgical laser, the manual one. For the next hour, the garage was a quiet theater of operation. Dale had never operated on an alien, but he knew mechanics and he knew biology was just wet machinery. He washed his hands with solvent and donned sterile gloves. He opened the pod but kept the stasis field active. He turned the girl onto her stomach. The wound on her side was clotting rapidly on its own, a testament to her bioengineering. But the lump near her spine was pulsing red. He made a small incision. The skin parted like silk. There was no blood, only a clear fluid. He used the micro-forceps to reach in. He felt metal, carefully, with the steady hands that made him the best mechanic in the sector. He extracted a small, black chip. It was spiky and looked malignant. He dropped it into a signal-dampening box and sealed it. A tracking implant. Someone wanted to know where she was very badly. He sutured the incision. The skin began to knit together before he had even finished the stitch. Dale stepped back and stripped off the gloves. He felt a strange vibration in his chest. He looked at her face through the glass. She looked peaceful now. There was a nobility to her features, a symmetry that was almost mathematical. He felt a stir of curiosity and something else, a recognition of loneliness. She was a long way from home. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. He was a mechanic, not a poet. He turned to the sky bike. The repulsor coil was fused. It would take him 3 hours to fix it before the client realized it had been taken. He told the girls to go to bed. He would deal with their punishment in the morning. They argued, but they were exhausted. They trudged inside, casting one last look at the glowing princess in the jar. Dale was alone again. He picked up his welder. He had work to do. He moved to the sky bike, opening the maintenance hatch. Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, inside the lead-lined pod, the alien girl shifted. Her hand twitched. Dale did not notice. He was focused on the coil. Juna had left her datapad on the workbench near the pod. The screen was cracked, but it was still connected to the local mesh network. The alien girl's hand pressed against the glass of the pod. A faint violet spark jumped from her fingertip, through the glass, and arced to the datapad. The screen flickered, a dormant subroutine in the alien's armor, sensing a network connection, sent a single compressed pulse of data. It was a beacon, a cry for help, or perhaps a target lock. The datapad screen flashed white for a microsecond, then went dark. Dale looked up. He thought he heard a hum. He looked around the shop. Everything was still. The alien was asleep. He shrugged and lowered his welding mask. The blue flame of the torch hissed to life. High above the atmosphere of Terra Nova, in the cold vacuum of orbit, a silent receiver on a passing satellite caught the signal. It retransmitted it instantly, beaming it across the dark gulf of space to a heavy cruiser waiting in the asteroid belt. On the bridge of that cruiser, a red light began to blink. Dale Kessler finished the weld and wiped the sweat from his brow. He looked at the alien girl one last time before turning off the shop lights. He thought he had fixed the problem. He had no idea that he had just invited the war to his doorstep. The mid-morning sun hammered against the corrugated metal roof of the garage, turning the interior into a kiln that smelled of baking dust and old grease. Dale Kessler was 3 coffees deep into a headache that throbbed behind his eyes like a loose piston. He was bent over the intake manifold of a moisture evaporator, trying to ignore the fact that he had a sleeping alien princess in a lead-lined box 10 feet away. Then the alarm on the recovery pod screamed. It was not a beep or a buzz. It was a high-pitched mechanical shriek that indicated a containment breach. Dale dropped his wrench. He spun around just as the heavy tempered glass of the pod lid shattered outward. It did not break into shards. It turned into dust, pulverized by a sudden violent frequency of sonic pressure. A lyra of the Virelian dominion rose from the vapor. She did not stumble. She moved with the fluid, predatory grace of a jungle cat waking from a nap. She was naked, save for the modest strips of biomesh clinging to her hips and chest, and she was absolutely terrifying. Dale grabbed a heavy pry bar from the bench, holding it up with both hands. Alera's eyes were wide, the violet irises swirling with adrenaline. She scanned the room, her head snapping left and right, processing the environment in microseconds. Her gaze landed on Dale. She lunged. She cleared the distance between the pod and the workbench in a single bound. Dale swung the pry bar, aiming for her shoulder to knock her back, but she caught the steel bar in midair with one hand. The impact shuddered through Dale's arms, rattling his teeth, but her arm did not even flex. She ripped the bar from his grip and tossed it across the room. It clattered loudly against the far wall. She slammed Dale backward against the tool rack, her forearm pressed against his windpipe, pinning him. She was shorter than him, but she felt as dense as a neutron star. She hissed a word that sounded like grinding stones. Dale wheezed and grabbed her wrist. It was cold, hard, and immovable. She spoke again, this time in a jagged approximation of trade standard English. Her accent was thick, metallic, and ancient. "Where is my blade?" Dale choked out that he did not have it. She pressed harder. Her eyes narrowed, the violet light intensifying. "Do not lie to me. Dirtborn. I had a kinetic blade and a pulse rifle. Where are they?" Dale managed to gasp that he put them in the safe. He told her he locked them up so she would not shoot his toaster. Illyra paused. The absurdity of the sentence seemed to short-circuit her rage for a nanosecond. She eased the pressure on his throat just enough for him to breathe. She looked around the shop, really seeing it for the first time. She saw the rusted parts, the half-assembled engines, the grime on the floor. She saw the sunlight slicing through the dust motes. She looked back at Dale. Her expression shifted from murder to confusion. "You are not a bounty hunter." Dale rubbed his throat, coughing. He told her he was a mechanic. He told her his name was Dale, and he would appreciate it if she stopped trying to kill him. Considering he had spent the last 6 hours removing a tracking chip from her spine. Illyra froze. She reached behind her back, her fingers tracing the spot where the incision had been. The skin was already smooth, healed by her accelerated metabolism, but she felt the absence of the foreign object. She stepped back, releasing him. She looked at her hands. They were trembling. Not from fear, Dale realized, but from weakness. Her bioluminescence was flickering. She demanded to see the chip. Dale pointed to the shielded lead box on the counter. Illyra opened it. She stared at the black, spiky device inside. Her face went rigid. She whispered that they found her. Dale asked who found her. She did not answer. She turned on him, her volatility returning. She demanded her armor. She said she had to leave. Now. Dale crossed his arms. He told her she was not going anywhere. He told her she had lost half her blood volume and her energy levels were crashing. If she walked out that door, the desert heat would cook her in 10 minutes. She snarled that she did not care. She said staying here endangered the mission. Dale stepped closer, his voice dropping an octave. He told her there was no mission. There was just a crashed bike, 2 scared teenage girls who dragged her out of the sand, and a mechanic who was tired of being choked. He told her to sit down. Illyra looked at him with utter bewilderment. No one commanded her. She was the heir to a throne that spanned 12 star systems. Yet this grease-stained human in a torn jumpsuit was ordering her to sit. The adrenaline left her all at once. She swayed. Dale caught her before she hit the floor, guiding her to a stool. She sat heavily, her head in her hands. The silence in the garage stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Illyra took a deep breath. She looked up at him. Her eyes scanned his face, not looking at his features, but seeming to look into him. Her pupils dilated. She asked him why the air in this room tasted like ash. Dale frowned. He checked the ventilation gauge. He told her the filters were clean. She shook her head. She touched her own chest. No, not the air, the feeling. "It is thick here, heavy. It clings to the walls. It clings to you." She stood up, her hand reaching out, hovering inches from his face. She narrowed her eyes. She said it was grief, immense, screaming grief. Dale slapped her hand away. He stepped back, his face hardening into stone. He told her to stop. Illyra did not stop. Her species was psionic. They communicated through empathy as much as sound. Now that her shields were down, the emotional resonance of the house was hitting her like a physical wave. She said someone died here, a female. She was fired and light, and then she was gone. She looked at the scorch marks on an old photo frame on the back shelf. She looked at the way Dale stood, his shoulders hunched as if protecting a wound that would not heal. She said it was his mate. She was killed. An explosion. Dale slammed his hand onto the workbench. The sound cracked like a gunshot. He shouted at her to shut up. He turned away, breathing hard. He stared at the wall, at the calendar that had not been changed in 4 years. Illyra stood frozen. She had overstepped. In the Dominion. Emotional reading was a standard part of negotiation, but she realized too late that humans hid their pain deep, burying it under layers of denial. She lowered her voice. She said she was sorry. She did not mean to intrude. The echo was simply very loud. Dale did not turn around. He asked her what she wanted. Illyra straightened her spine. She decided that truth was the only currency she had left. She told him she was not just a fugitive. She told him her name was Illyra Varos, first daughter of the High Exarch, and she told him that her body was not just flesh and blood. She tapped her sternum. She said she carried the core. Dale turned around slowly. He asked what that meant. She explained. The core was a symbiotic artificial intelligence, a sentient energy matrix that had guided her people for 1,000 years. It chose a host from the royal line once every generation. It granted wisdom, tactical foresight, and the ability to interface with any machine in the galaxy. It was the key to peace. It was also the ultimate weapon. She said her uncle, the regent, wanted it. He wanted to cut it out of her and use it to enslave the independent colonies, including Terra Nova. She looked Dale in the eye. She said if they caught her, they would kill her. And then they would burn this world to make sure no witnesses remained. Dale looked at her. He saw the fear she was trying to hide behind her royal bearing. He saw a girl who was younger than she acted, carrying a burden that would crush a starship. He sighed. He picked up the pry bar from the floor and set it back on the rack. He told her she was safe here. He told her he was good at fixing broken things. 50 miles to the west, at the colony checkpoint Alpha, a black transport shuttle touched down on the landing pad. The heat shimmering off the tarmac distorted the air, making the shuttle look like a mirage. 3 men walked down the ramp. They wore the gray uniforms of the colonial marshals, but their boots were too clean, and their weapons were too expensive. The leader, a man named Kalen, did not look at the customs officer approaching them. He looked at the horizon. He was tall, gaunt, and wore a pair of opaque sensory-dampening goggles. The customs officer asked for their papers. Kalen ignored him. He tilted his head, inhaling sharply through his nose. He was a psi tracker, a genetic deviate bred in the labs of the Dominion for one purpose: to hunt. He could taste the psionic trail on the wind. It was faint, masked by the radiation of the twin suns, but it was there. It tasted like ozone and royal blood. One of the other men, a brute with a scar running down his jaw, asked if he had the scent. Kalen nodded slowly. He pointed a gloved finger toward the east, toward the dusty outskirts of the colony where the mechanic shops and scrap yards lay. He said she was hurt. He said she was scared. And he said she was with a local. The customs officer tried to step in front of them, demanding authorization. Kalen moved his hand in a quick, sharp gesture. The customs officer's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed to the pavement, unconscious before he hit the ground. Kalen stepped over the body. He told his men to load the skimmer. He said they would have the princess by nightfall. Back in the garage, Dale was working faster than he had in years. He had pulled the old magnetic shielding panels off the walls of the storage shed and was bolting them to the interior of the garage. Illyra watched him. She had dressed in a pair of Dale's oversized coveralls, rolling the sleeves up to her elbows. She looked ridiculous and regal at the same time. She asked what he was doing. Dale explained that if she had a tracking chip, they also had her biosignature on file. He explained that her body emitted a specific radiation frequency, the violet glow, that would light up a scanner like a flare in a dark room. He was building a Faraday cage, but stronger. He was lining the garage with lead and ionizing the air with a low-level plasma field generated by the welder's power supply. It would create static. It would make her invisible to sensors. Illyra ran her hand over the rough welding Dale had just finished. She noted that his technology was primitive. She said it was crude. Dale grinned, a tight, fleeting expression. He said crude was sturdy. Crude worked. He asked her to hand him the hydro spanner. She hesitated, then picked up the tool. She handed it to him. Their fingers brushed. A spark of static electricity snapped between them. Not the dangerous kind, just a simple terrestrial shock. They both pulled back. Dale cleared his throat. He went back to work. For the next 6 hours, they worked in tandem. Dale realized that Illyra knew more about physics and energy displacement than any engineer he had ever met. She anticipated his needs. She handed him tools before he asked. She pointed out stress fractures in the metal that his eyes missed. It was the first time since Sarah died that Dale had worked with a partner. It felt natural. It felt dangerous. By the time the twin suns set, the garage was a fortress. The air hummed with the faint blue haze of the plasma field. Dale wiped the grease from his face. He told her it was done. As long as she stayed inside the field, they could not see her. Illyra looked at the barricaded windows. She asked what about his daughters. Dale said they were at school. He had sent them a message to stay at their aunt's house in town for the night. He told them he was doing a hazardous chemical flush in the shop. He did not want them anywhere near the crossfire if this went wrong. Illyra nodded. She walked to the back door, the one that led to the small patio overlooking the old wind generators. She asked if they could go outside, just for a moment. She said the field should extend that far. Dale checked his data pad. The field radius covered the patio. He nodded. They stepped out into the cool desert night. The wind generators were massive, ancient turbines that rose 300 feet into the air. Their blades turned slowly in the night breeze, a rhythmic whoosh, whoosh, whoosh that sounded like the heartbeat of the planet. The sky was a tapestry of diamond dust. The 2 moons of Terra Nova hung low and heavy, casting long blue shadows across the dunes. Illyra leaned against the railing. She took a deep breath of the cool air. She looked up at the stars. She asked Dale if he believed in fate. Dale stood next to her, leaning on the rusted rail. He said he believed in cause and effect. He believed that if you did not change your oil, your engine seized. That was about it. Illyra smiled. It was a small, sad smile. She said her people believed that souls were threads woven into a great tapestry. She said some threads were knotted together before they were even born. She turned to look at him. The moonlight caught the silver sheen of her skin, making her look ethereal, like a statue carved from starlight. She asked him about the woman. Sarah. Dale stiffened, but the anger from earlier was gone, replaced by the exhaustion of the day. He told her Sarah was a pilot. She flew atmospheric shuttles. She was fearless. She laughed louder than anyone he knew. Elira listened, her violet eyes soft. She asked if humans mated for life. Dale looked at his hands. He said some did. He said he did. Elira moved closer. She smelled of ozone and the soap from his bathroom. She was fascinated by the concept. She said in the Dominion, unions were arranged. They were genetic calculations designed to strengthen the bloodline. Love was considered a biological chaotic variable. It was discouraged. She looked at Dale's face, studying the lines around his eyes, the gray in his beard. She asked if it hurt to lose her. Dale looked at her. He decided to tell the truth. He said it felt like someone reached into his chest and pulled out the part of him that knew how to breathe. He said for a long time, he was just a ghost, haunting his own life. Elira's expression crumbled into something profoundly gentle. She reached out. She placed her hand over his heart. Her palm was cool, but the energy beneath it was warm. Dale felt a strange sensation, a soothing vibration that seemed to seep through his shirt and into his skin. His pulse kicked, hard and fast. Elira tilted her head. She whispered that his heart was beating very fast. Dale could not speak. He was paralyzed by the proximity of her. She was an alien. She was royalty. She was a fugitive. And she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She leaned in. Her eyes searched for him. She was curious. She wanted to understand this human emotion that was powerful enough to break a man and keep him standing at the same time. She whispered his name. Dale. He leaned in too. The space between them shrank to nothing. He could see the intricate geometric patterns of her irises. The air between them is charged with static. It was magnetic. Dale closed his eyes. He was about to cross a line he could never uncross. Then the back door slammed open. Dale jumped back as if he had been shot. Elira spun around, her hands flashing up in a defensive posture. It was Casey. She was panting, her face flushed, her eyes wide with terror. She was clutching her datapad. She shouted, "Dad!" Dale rushed to her. He grabbed her shoulders. He asked what she was doing here. He told her to stay at Aunt May's. Casey shook her head violently. She gasped for air. She said she had to come. She said she heard people talking in town. She said there were men in suits. They were at the fueling station. They were showing people a hologram. She looked at Elira. Casey said the hologram was of her. Dale went cold. He looked at Elira. Casey continued. She said the men were asking about energy spikes. They were scanning the grid, and they were coming this way. Dale swore. He turned to Elira. He said they had to move. The plasma shield would hide her from sensors, but it would not hide her from a physical search. If they knocked on the door, it was over. He told Casey to go inside and pack a bag. Essentials only. Elira stepped forward. She looked at Dale. There was fear in her eyes, but also a fierce determination. She reached out and grabbed his arm. She said she could fight. She said she would not let them hurt his family. As her skin touched his bare forearm, something happened. Her emotions were spiking, fear, protectiveness, adrenaline, and Dale was running hot with panic. The connection between them acted as a conduit. A pulse of pure, unbridled bioenergy surged from Elira's core, traveled through her arm, and blasted into Dale. It did not hurt him. It passed through him, grounding itself into the floor of the patio. But the floor of the patio was concrete poured over the old foundations of the original mechanic shop. and buried deep beneath that concrete, connected to the dormant power grid of the property, was the buried machinery of Illyra's crash site. The pod. Dale had thought it was just a vessel. He had deactivated the distress beacon. But he did not know that Varelian pods were symbiotic. They responded to the biosignature of their pilot. The pulse hit the buried receiver in the garage floor. A low, resonant thrum vibrated through the soles of their feet. It started as a murmur and grew into a steady, rhythmic pounding. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Casey looked down. She asked what that noise was. Dale looked at Illyra. Illyra's eyes went wide. She pulled her hand away, horrified. She whispered, "Oh no." Dale asked what she did. Illyra backed away. She said the pod. It was not just a life raft. It was a secure containment unit. When she left it, it entered a lockdown protocol. She said if the pilot was detected nearby but did not re-enter, the pod assumed the pilot was compromised. She looked at Dale, her face pale silver. She said the pulse just triggered the fail-safe. It was a dead man's switch. From the garage, a mechanical voice, loud and synthetic, began to speak. It echoed through the walls. Pilot biosignature confirmed. Threat assessment. Critical. Security protocol Omega initiated. Signal lock engaging, a fleet broadcast in T-minus 15 minutes. Dale stared at the garage. The pod was going to broadcast their location to the entire Varelian fleet in 15 minutes. Casey screamed that they had to turn it off. Dale ran for the door. He shouted that they did not have 15 minutes, because if that pod started broadcasting, the bounty hunters would see the energy spike from orbit. He grabbed his keys. He looked at Illyra. He told her they were out of time. The sound of the countdown ticking away the seconds of their lives. The synthetic voice of the recovery pod was calm, which made the threat infinitely worse. It did not scream. It simply stated the end of the world in a flat, modulated tone. Security protocol Omega active. Broadcast initializing. Grid alignment in 12 minutes. Dale Kessler threw himself under the chassis of the pod, his back sliding against the oil-stained concrete. He jammed a hydrospanner into the maintenance panel he had pried open, trying to short the power coupling. Sparks showered down, hot and biting against his neck, but the machine did not care. The Varelian alloy was shifting, the metal rippling like water to reform around his tools and push them out. It was fighting him. He scrambled out, his face smeared with grease and sweat. He threw the spanner across the room. It struck the far wall with a clang that was swallowed by the rising hum of the pod's transmitter. Illyra stood by the workbench, her hands gripping the edge until the metal deformed under her fingers. The violet light in her tattoos was pulsing erratically, a strobe light of panic. Dale shouted that the bypass was not working. He said the system was rewriting its own code faster than he could cut the wires. Illyra looked at him, her eyes wide and filled with a terrifying clarity. She said it was a dead man switch. It was designed to prevent capture. If the pilot did not authenticate within the window, the pod assumed they were compromised. It would broadcast the coordinates to the Dominion execution fleet. Dale asked what that meant. She said it meant a kinetic bombardment. She said they would not send a rescue team. They would send a tungsten rod from orbit at Mach 20. They would vaporize the shop, the town, and half the desert just to make sure the asset was destroyed. 10 minutes remaining. Dale stared at her. He thought of Casey and Juna inside the house. He thought of the town down the road. He grabbed his laser cutter. He said he was going to cut the core out. Illyra grabbed his wrist. Her grip was iron. She shook her head. She said if he breached the casing with a laser, the antimatter battery would detonate. Dale dropped the cutter. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of pure, impotent frustration. He asked her how to stop it. He shouted at her, asking for the code, the key, anything. Illyra stared at the pulsing light of the pod. She said there was no code. The key was biological. It required a direct neural handshake from the registered pilot. Dale pointed at the interface port. He told her to stick her hand in there and shake it. She stepped back. She looked at her own hands, trembling with energy depletion. She said she could not. Her levels were too low. The pod would drain the last of her life force to confirm the sequence. It would kill her before the signal stopped. She looked at Dale. A strange, desperate calculation crossed her face. She said there was another way. A proxy. She stepped closer to him. The air between them crackled with static. She said she could use him. She could use his bioelectricity as a battery, channeling her neural signature through his nervous system to the machine. But she needed a conduit, a bridge. Dale asked what she needed him to do. She did not answer with words. She reached out and grabbed the lapels of his greasy coveralls. She pulled him down. She kissed him. It was not a romantic gesture. It was a collision. Her lips were cool and tasted of ozone and copper. As soon as contact was made, Dale felt a shockwave hit his brain that was harder than any physical blow he had ever taken. His vision went white. The garage dissolved. He was no longer standing on concrete. He was flying. He was seeing through her eyes. He saw a city of silver spires rising from a purple ocean, the buildings singing in the wind. He felt a crushing sense of duty, a weight on his shoulders that made his knees buckle. He saw a throne room, vast and cold. He saw a man with a cruel smile, her uncle, signing a document that condemned 1,000 worlds to starvation. The scene shifted violently. Fire. He smelled burning ozone and flesh. He was running down a corridor of glass, explosions shattering the walls. He felt the searing pain of a betrayal, a knife in the dark, the realization that the people sworn to protect him were the ones hunting him. He felt her loneliness. It was a vast, dark cavern inside her chest, deeper than his own grief, sharper than his own loss. She was a weapon, a tool, a piece of property. She had never been touched with kindness, only with reverence or violence. Dale gasped, his physical body arching against hers in the garage. The influx of data was overwhelming. He was drowning in her soul. But beneath the chaos, he felt the command. She was pushing the authorization code through him. She was using his chaotic, stubborn human will to force the lock open. Authorize, cancel, stand down. The command roared through his mind like a train. In the garage, the humming of the pod reached a crescendo, a shriek of protesting electronics. Then, with a sound like a heavy breaker tripping, it died. The lights on the pod went dark. The countdown ceased. Illyra broke the kiss. They stumbled back from each other, both gasping as if they had just surfaced from deep water. Dale grabbed the workbench to steady himself. His heart was hammering a rhythm that did not belong to him. His skin felt electrified. He looked at her. Illyra was leaning against the deactivated pod. Her silver skin was flushed with a color Dale had never seen before. A soft, luminescent lavender spreading across her cheeks and down her neck. Her chest was heaving. She touched her lips, her eyes wide, staring at him with a mixture of shock and wonder. She whispered that she did not intend for him to see all of that. Dale wiped his mouth. His hand was shaking. He looked at this alien woman, this princess of a star empire, and for the first time, he did not see the armor or the politics. He saw the girl running down the glass corridor. He saw a person who was just as lonely as he was. He said it was okay. He said he saw her. Illyra looked down. the lavender flush deepening. It was the first time she had ever blushed, before either of them could speak, before they could process the tectonic shift that had just occurred between them. The red emergency light above the garage door began to flash. A heavy, rhythmic thudding echoed from the front of the house. Someone was hammering on the main door. Dale's instincts, sharpened by years of living on the edge of the law, snapped back into place. The softness vanished from his face, replaced by hard lines. He checked the monitors. 3 thermal signatures at the front door. Heavy weapons. These were not local cops. He looked at Alira. He said they were here. From the house intercom. Casey's voice crackled through, shrill and terrified, but acting her heart out. I don't know what you want. My dad isn't home. He's at the supply depot. It's just me and my sister. A heavy male voice responded, muffled but aggressive. Open the door, citizen. Colonial Marshals. We are scanning a massive energy surge from this structure. Dale swore. He grabbed a heavy duffel bag from under the bench. He threw a med kit, 2 canteens of water, and a magnetic pulse pistol into it. He looked at Alira. He told her they had to go. Now. Elira looked toward the door connecting the garage to the house. She asked about the girls. Dale gritted his teeth. He said Casey knew the drill. He had taught them what to do if debt collectors or angry clients came looking for trouble. They would play dumb. They would stall. They were minors. Even bounty hunters had limits on a sanctioned colony world. If he and Elira were gone, the girls were safe. If they were found here, everyone would die. He grabbed Elira's hand. He did not ask this time. He led her to the back of the garage, to the mechanics pit where he worked on the undercarriages of heavy haulers. He kicked aside a pile of greasy mats, revealing a rusted iron grate. He pulled it up. Beneath it was not a drainage pipe, but a dark, reinforced tunnel. Alira looked at the dark hole. She asked what this was. Dale jumped down, the bag slung over his shoulder. He reached up for her. He said the previous owner of this shop ran illicit spices from the equator. He said he never thought he would use it, but he kept it greased just in case. Elira hesitated for a fraction of a second, hearing the sound of the front door being kicked upstairs. The crash of wood splintering echoed through the vents. She jumped. Dale caught her. They were standing in the cool, damp dark of the earth, above them. The sounds of heavy boots stomped across the floorboards of the living room. Dale reached up and pulled the grate back into place. He engaged the magnetic lock from the inside. He turned on a small pen light. The beam cut through the stale air, illuminating a narrow tunnel shored up with plasteel beams. He whispered for her to follow him. They ran. The tunnel was cramped, smelling of dry rot and old secrets. They moved in silence, the only sound the scuff of their boots and their synchronized breathing. Above them, the hunt was tearing Dale's home apart, but down here they were ghosts. They were. The tunnel ran for 2 miles, cutting under the main road and the perimeter fence of the outpost, terminating at the base of a rocky ridge deep in the desert. When they finally emerged, pushing open a camouflage hatch concealed beneath a cluster of scrub brush, the night air hit them like a physical blow. It was hot, dry, and silent. They were out. Dale checked the horizon. The lights of his shop were a distant cluster of yellow pinpricks. He could see the flashing blue lights of the marshal's skimmer parked in his driveway. He swallowed the bile in his throat. He hoped Casey and Juna were sticking to the script. He turned to Alira. He pointed toward a silhouette on the top of the ridge, a skeletal metal tower rising against the stars. He said they would head for the old weather station. It had been automated and abandoned 20 years ago. It had water, shelter, and it was shielded against solar flares, which meant it was shielded against scanners. The trek up the ridge was brutal. The sand was loose, sliding under their feet with every step. Elira, weakened by the pod interaction and her injuries, stumbled twice, both times. Dale caught her. He did not let go of her arm. They reached the station an hour later. Dale forced the rusted door open, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the air was stale and hot, trapping the day's heat. The station was a single circular room dominated by dusty consoles and a large observation window that looked out over the endless dune sea. Dale dropped the bag. He slumped against a console, sliding down to the floor. He put his head between his knees, trying to slow his heart rate. Elira stood in the center of the room. The moonlight filtered through the dirty glass, illuminating her armor. The bioluminescence of her tattoos was dim, pulsing with a slow, weary rhythm. She looked around the desolate metal room. Then she looked at herself. She began to unlasp the gorget at her neck. Dale looked up. He asked what she was doing. Elira did not stop. She pulled the heavy plate of Varelian alloy from her chest and let it drop to the floor. It hit with a heavy thud. She unsealed the gauntlets. Then the greaves. Piece by piece, she dismantled the shell of the princess. She stripped away the symbols of her station, the protection of her rank. She stood there in the thin, semi-translucent undersuit that clung to her like a second skin. She looked smaller without the armor. She looked vulnerable. She said she was tired. She said she had been wearing that armor since she was 12 years old. She was tired of being a symbol. She was tired of being a key. She was tired of being a weapon. She walked over to where Dale sat. She knelt in front of him, the movement fluid and human. She looked him in the eyes. The violet stars in her irises were soft now, lacking the imperious fire of the royalty. She said tonight she did not want to be a Lyra of the Dominion. She did not want to be the first daughter. She reached out and touched his face. Her fingers were cool against his stubble. She whispered that she just wanted to be a woman, and she wanted to know if he could look at her and see only that. Dale looked at her. He saw the dirt on her cheek. He saw the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. He saw the fear she was keeping at bay with sheer will. He reached up and covered her hand with his. His palm was rough, calloused from years of turning wrenches and fixing broken things. Hers was smooth, engineered for perfection. He said he had been looking at her since she fell out of the sky, and he had never seen anything else. Elira leaned in. This time, there was no desperate need for a neural interface. There was no life or death utility. She kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark. Dale answered it. He shifted, pulling her closer, his hands moving to the small of her back. The kiss deepened. It was strange. Her mouth felt different, her breathing rhythm slightly faster than a human's, but it was undeniably beautiful. As they moved together, the connection sparked again, but this time it was not a tidal wave of data. It was a gentle current. Dale could feel her emotions as if they were his own. He felt her relief. He felt her curiosity. He felt a sudden, intense flare of affection that warmed him from the inside out. She straddled his lap, her hands tangling in his hair. The undersuit she wore was smooth and cool, but her skin beneath it burned with a feverish heat. Dale forgot about the bounty hunters. He forgot about the shop. He forgot about the grief that had defined his existence for 4 years. In the silence of the weather station, surrounded by dust and ancient machinery, the lonely mechanic and the fugitive princess found a common language. It was clumsy and raw and deeply human. Elira marveled at the friction of skin, the roughness of his hands, the heavy, erratic thumping of his heart against her chest. She had been bred for perfection, but she found perfection in his flaws. Later, they lay together on the floor, covered by a dusty tarp Dale had pulled from a locker. The room was silent, save for the wind whistling through the external sensors. Illyra rested her head on Dale's shoulder. Her eyes were closed. Her tattoos had dimmed to a soft, steady glow, a nightlight in the dark. Dale stroked her hair. It was silver and fine, like spun silk. He felt a peace he had not expected to ever feel again. He was in trouble, deeper than he had ever been in his life, but he did not care. He whispered that they would figure this out. He said he had friends. He had a plan. Illyra did not answer immediately. She shifted, her body stiffening against his side. Dale stopped moving his hand. He asked what was wrong. Illyra opened her eyes. The violet light flared, sharp and sudden. She sat up, the tarp falling away from her shoulders. She turned her head toward the window, toward the east, toward the darkness where the hunters waited. She put a hand to her temple. Her breath hitched. Dale sat up. He reached for the magnetic pistol he had left on the floor. He asked what she saw. Illyra looked at him, her face pale, the peace of the last hour shattered into 1,000 pieces. She said she did not see anything. She felt it. It was a cold hook in the back of her mind, a familiar scratching presence that smelled of old blood and mental static. She whispered that he was here, the tracker. She looked at Dale, her eyes filling with a new kind of terror. Not for herself, but for him. She said the psychic echo had found her. The moment of intimacy, the unguarded release of emotion they had just shared, it had acted like a flare in the dark. She grabbed Dale's arm. She said they knew exactly where she was. In the silence of the weather station, the wind outside no longer sounded like a lullaby, but like a warning siren. From the rusted observation deck of the weather station, the desert below looked like a sea of ink. The twin moons cast long, distorted shadows across the dunes, but it was not the shadows that made the hair on Dale Kessler's arms stand up. It was the sound carrying on the wind. It was a low, wet chittering, like insects swarming inside a drum. Illyra stood pressed against the dirty glass, her forehead resting against the pane. The violet light of her tattoos had dimmed to a barely visible pulse, a sign of her dangerous exhaustion. She pointed toward the base of the ridge, 2 miles out. She whispered that they had brought a hound. Dale raised his bioculars. The green night vision display flickered, struggling with the interference from the magnetic storm brewing in the upper atmosphere. He focused the lenses on the convoy of armored skimmers moving slowly across the sand. They were fan-shaped, military-grade, kicking up rooster tails of dust. In front of the lead skimmer, something was running. It was not a machine. It was a biological nightmare. It moved on 6 limbs, low to the ground, its body covered in chitinous plates that absorbed the moonlight. It had no eyes, only a cluster of sensory tendrils waving from a sleek, eyeless head. It moved with a jerky, frantic energy, snapping at the air, tasting the psychic residue Illyra had left behind. Dale lowered the binoculars. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He had heard stories of Varelian psi-hounds from the old war vets who drank at the space dock bars. They said the things could smell fear, but what they really smelled was neural activity. They tracked the unique electrical firing of a specific brain. Illyra turned from the window. Her face was pale, stripping away the alien mystique to reveal a terrified young woman. She grabbed her pile of discarded armor, her hands shaking as she tried to lift the breastplate. She told Dale that he had to leave. She said she would draw them away. She would walk out onto the ridge, flare her energy signature, and lead the hound north into the salt flats. Dale grabbed the armor from her hands and dropped it back to the floor. The metal clanged loudly in the silence. He told her to stop. Alira's voice rose, cracking with desperation. She told him to look at that thing. She said it would not stop until it tasted her blood. She grabbed his shoulders, her fingers digging into his jacket. She told him he had daughters. She told him that if he stayed with her, the marshals would kill him as a collaborator. She pleaded with him not to make Casey and Juna orphans because of a stranger he found in the sand. Dale looked at her. He looked at the fear in her eyes, a fear that was entirely selfless. She was royalty, bred to rule, yet her first instinct was to die so a mechanic she had known for 24 hours could live. He took her hands. He held them tight enough to stop her trembling. He spoke quietly, his voice rough with the dust of the station. He said he had already lost one woman he loved because he did not fight hard enough. He said he had spent 4 years telling himself there was nothing he could have done to save Sarah from that shuttle crash. But the truth was, he had let her fly on a bad regulator because he was too tired to fix it that night. He lived with that ghost every time he looked at his empty bed. He looked Alira in the eye. He told her he was not going to do that again. He was not going to watch another woman walk out into the dark to die while he stood safe in the shadows. Alira stared at him. The violet swirls in her eyes slowed. She saw the resolve in him, a stubborn terrestrial hardness that was stronger than any alloy her people could forge. Dale released her hands. He unclipped the comlink from his belt. It was an old, illegal frequency hopper he used for black market parts deals. He keyed the mic. He said it was time to call in some favors. An hour later, the silence of the weather station was broken by the roar of engines. But these were not the sleek hums of the marshal's skimmers. These were the coughing, spitting, illegal roars of modified heavy lifters and blockade runners. 3 ships dropped out of the low cloud cover, landing in the lee of the ridge to avoid the scanners of the approaching hunting party. First out of the cockpit of a battered freighter was Brax. He was a weak-ace smuggler with leathery skin and a collection of blaster scars that he wore like medals. He was followed by Jinx, a rogue cybertech who had been banned from the inner systems for hacking a banking guild, and Old Man Rice, a retired pilot who flew a crop duster that was secretly armed with military-grade flak cannons. And with Brax were Casey and Juna. Dale ran out to meet them. He hugged his daughter so hard he felt their ribs creak. Casey was crying, wiping snot on his jacket. Juna was shaking, clutching a heavy wrench she must have grabbed from the shop before Brax extracted them. Brax spit a stream of chewing tobacco onto the sand. He told Dale that the marshals had torched the shop. He said the garage was a smoking crater. He had gotten the girls out the back way just as the front door came down. Dale nodded. The loss of the shop hurt, a dull ache in his chest. But looking at his girls alive, the pain vanished. He turned to the crew. He introduced Alira. The smugglers went silent. They looked at the silver-skinned woman standing in the doorway of the weather station, the starlight catching the faint glow of her tattoos. They knew what she was. They knew the bounty on her head was enough to buy a moon. Brax looked at Dale. He asked if this was the problem. Dale nodded. He said she was the trouble. And she was with him. Brax looked at Alira, then back at Dale. He grinned, revealing gold-capped teeth. He said he always knew Dale had a taste for high-maintenance women. The tension broke. The crew moved into action. Dale laid out the plan on the hood of Rice's crop duster. It was desperate, stupid, and exactly the kind of scheme that only a group of grease monkeys could dream up. The bounty hunters were tracking Alira's specific bioenergy signature. The hound was locked onto it. They needed to split that signal. Dale pointed to the cargo hold of Brax's freighter. Inside was the wreckage of the military skybike the girls had crashed, the chassis that started this whole mess. Brax had hauled it out of the dunes earlier that week for salvage. Dale told Jinx to strip the core from the bike's engine. He told Alira he needed her to bleed. Alira blinked. She asked what he meant. Dale explained. He needed her to interface with the bike's remaining power cells. He needed her to imprint her biosignature onto the machine's computer, overload it, and turn the entire wreck into a screaming, glowing beacon of psionic energy. Then, they would strap that beacon to a remote-piloted drone and fire it south into the deep canyons. The Hound would chase the loudest signal. While the hunters went south, Dale and Alira would take Rice's crop duster north to the hidden smuggler's launch platform built into the side of the magma vents. It was a shell game. Juna stepped forward. She grabbed Dale's arm. She said she wanted to fly the drone. She was the best pilot in the family, better than Casey, better than Dale. She said she could make the drone dance. She could keep the hunters occupied for hours. Dale looked at his youngest daughter. She looked fierce, grown up in a way he was not ready for. He put his hands on her shoulders. He looked at Casey, who was standing right behind her, ready to argue the same point. He shook his head. He told them no. He said this was not a debate. He was their father, and for once, they were going to listen. He told them they were going with Brax. They were going to hide in the asteroid belt until he sent the signal. Juna started to cry, protesting that he needed help. Dale pulled them both into a hug. He whispered into their hair. He told them to be smarter than he ever was. He told them not to let loyalty get them killed. He told them he loved them more than oxygen. He shoved them gently toward Brax. He told the smuggler to keep them safe. If Dale did not make it, Brax was to take them to their grandmother on Mars. Brax nodded solemnly. He dragged the protesting girls into the freighter. Dale turned back to the work. He had 20 minutes to build a ghost. The desert night exploded with light. The decoy, the hollowed-out shell of the skybike, rigged with Alira's energy imprint and a localized fusion battery, screamed out of the weather station's bay. Jinx had programmed it to fly erratically, mimicking a damaged panic flight. It streaked south, blazing with a violet ion trail that looked exactly like a leaking Varelian drive core. Down in the valley, the Sci-Hound shrieked. It was a sound that vibrated in the teeth of everyone on the ridge. The beast tore off toward the south, kicking up sand. The convoy of marshals turned, their engines whining as they gave chase, swallowing the bait whole. Dale waited 30 seconds. Then he slapped the side of the crop duster. He told Alira to get in. The crop duster was an ugly machine. It was built for durability, not speed. It smelled of fertilizer and recycled air. But it had a shielded cargo hold and an engine that Dale had tuned himself 3 years ago. Alira climbed into the passenger seat behind him. She looked exhausted. The process of imprinting the decoy had drained her. Her skin was gray, the luster gone. Dale fired the engine. The prop rotors spun to life. He kept the altitude low, barely 10 feet off the deck, skimming the tops of the dunes to stay under the radar shadow. They flew north, away from the noise, toward the jagged tear in the earth known as the magma scars. For 10 minutes, it worked. The radio was full of the marshals shouting coordinates, chasing the ghost drone in the south. Dale allowed himself a small breath of relief. Then the radar warning receiver on the dashboard lit up red. Alira gasped. She clutched the back of Dale's seat. She said the Hound had stopped. Dale looked at the scope. The blip representing the hunting party had turned. They were not chasing the drone anymore. The hound had realized the signal was artificial. It was dead meat. The beast wanted live prey, and now it had reacquired the scent. A missile warning tone blared, a flat, continuous lock-on screech. Dale shouted for Illyra to hold on. He banked the duster hard to the right, diving into a narrow slot canyon. A microsecond later, a streak of fire roared past their canopy, detonating against the canyon wall. The shockwave slammed into the duster, rattling the rivets. Dale fought the stick. The hydraulics whined. He pushed the throttle to the emergency stop, overriding the safety governors. The engine screamed. Behind them, 3 fast-attack interceptors peeled off from the main convoy. They were faster than the duster, much faster. Dale yelled that he was going to try to lose them in the vents. He dove deeper into the earth. The magma scars were a network of volcanic fissures, filled with rising steam and toxic heat. The air was turbulent, battering the small plane. Another missile hit the cliff face above them, raining boulders down. One rock the size of a tire clipped the tail rotor. The duster lurched. The stick kicked back in Dale's hand, snapping his wrist. He screamed in pain but didn't let go. He jammed his forearm against the yoke, steering with his weight. Smoke filled the cockpit. The rear stabilizer was gone. They were falling. Dale shouted that he was putting her down. He aimed for a flat shelf of obsidian rock near a steaming vent. The landing was not a landing. It was a controlled crash. The duster slammed into the rock, skidded for 300 feet, sheared off its wings, and ground to a halt in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Silence returned, heavy and hot. Dale unbuckled his harness. He tried to move, but his side erupted in agony. He looked down. A piece of the fuselage, a jagged shard of steel, had punched through the cockpit wall and driven itself into his abdomen, just above the hip. He was pinned. Illyra was already moving. She kicked out the shattered canopy glass. She scrambled over the console, her hands frantic. She saw the blood. It was dark and thick, soaking Dale's coveralls. She grabbed the metal shard. She told him this would hurt. She pulled. Dale blacked out for a second. When he came to, he was being dragged. Illyra, a woman who weighed half of what he did, had her arms under his shoulders. She was hauling him across the obsidian shelf, away from the burning wreck. They made it to a shallow cave, a lava tube that vented warm, sulfurous air. Illyra collapsed, dropping Dale onto the ash-covered floor. She scrambled to verify the entrance was hidden. She used her telekinesis, feeble now, just a whisper of power to pull a few loose rocks across the opening. She crawled back to Dale. It was dark in the cave, lit only by the red glow of the magma deep below and the dying embers of Illyra's tattoos. Dale was coughing. Every cough brought up copper-tasting blood. He knew mechanics. He knew when a machine was broken beyond repair. He could feel the cold spreading in his legs. Illyra was hovering over him. She was tearing strips from her undersuit, trying to pack the wound in his side. Her hands were slick with his blood. She was crying, silent, silver tears that tracked through the dust on her face. Dale reached up. His hand was heavy, like it was made of lead. He touched her cheek. He whispered to her. He told her to stop. Illyra shook her head violently. She said she could fix it. She said she just needed a moment to recharge. Dale smiled. It was a weak, bloody grimace. He told her she was empty. He could feel it. The connection between them was faint, like a radio losing signal. He coughed again, his body seizing with pain. He looked at her. He saw the princess, the weapon, the girl. He asked her to promise him something. Illyra leaned down, her ear to his lips. She sobbed that she would promise anything. Dale swallowed. His voice was a dry rasp. He told her not to become their weapon. He told her that when she got out of here, she should not let the galaxy turn her into a gun. He told her not to forget the mechanic who saw her for who she was. Not a princess, just a Lyra. He told her she was worth more than her core. Elira pulled back. She looked at his face. The light was leaving his eyes. The gray of death was settling into his skin. She sat up. Her expression changed. The panic vanished, replaced by a terrifying, serene calm. She said she refused to accept that. She placed her hands on his chest, directly over the wound. Dale tried to push her away. He knew what she was doing. He knew the cost. He whispered no. He said it would kill her. Elira ignored him. She closed her eyes. She reached deep inside herself, past the exhaustion, past the biological limits of her flesh. She reached for the core, the ancient sentient energy matrix that lived in her DNA. Usually, the core drew energy from the host. Tonight, she commanded it to reverse the flow. She whispered that he gave her back her life. Now she was returning the favor. She kissed him. This time, the kiss was not a question. It was a transfer. A blinding white light erupted in the cave. It was brighter than the sun's, brighter than the magma. It was the raw energy of a starship reactor condensed into a human form. Dale screamed. It felt like being set on fire, but it was a cold fire. He felt the atoms of his body vibrating. He felt the torn flesh of his abdomen knitting together, cell by cell, accelerated by 1,000 years. He felt his blood replenishing, the toxins burning away. He felt Elira withering. Through the connection, he felt her life force pouring into him like water from a cracked pitcher. He felt her heartbeat slowing, skipping, fading. He tried to break the connection, to push her away, but he was paralyzed by the intensity of the energy. She was pouring her soul into the empty spaces of his. The light flared one last time, turning the cave into a blinding white void, and then instantly vanished. Darkness rushed back in. Dale gasped, sucking in a lungful of sulfurous air. The pain was gone. The cold was gone. He felt strong, energized, buzzing with residual static. He sat up. Elira was lying next to him. She was not glowing. Her skin had lost its silver sheen, turning a dull, flat gray. The tattoos on her ribs were black, charred-looking. Her chest was not moving. Dale scrambled over to her. He shouted her name. He shook her shoulders. She was limp, heavy, and terrifyingly cold. He pressed his ear to her chest. Silence. Dale Kessler, the man who could fix anything, stared at the broken girl on the floor of the cave. He put his hand over her heart, begging it to beat. He whispered that she promised. He whispered that she could not do this. Outside the cave, the sound of heavy boots crunched on the obsidian. The hunt had arrived, but Dale did not look at the entrance. He just held Elira's lifeless hand and screamed into the dark. The consciousness returned to Elira not as a gentle waking, but as a cold, sharp resurrection. She gasped, her lungs filling with air that was too clean, too sterile. It lacked the grit of the desert. It smelled of recycled oxygen and ionizing radiation. She tried to move her hands, but they were held fast by magnetic binders clamped to the arms of a chair that felt like it was sculpted from ice. She opened her eyes. The room was a monochromatic nightmare of polished white and charcoal gray. The walls hummed with the subsonic vibration of a starship engine running at station-keeping power. She was no longer in the lava tube. She was no longer on Terra Nova. She was on a Varelian heavy cruiser. A shadow detached itself from the far wall and stepped into the circle of harsh light that illuminated her chair. The figure was tall, draped in the shimmering liquid metal robes of the high court. His face was a mirror of her own, sharp cheekbones, silver skin, eyes that swirled with violet nebulas. But where her face held defiance, his held a sneering aristocratic boredom. It was Vorian, her cousin, the regent's son. He smiled, a thin expression that did not reach his eyes. He held a datapad in one long-fingered hand, tapping it idly. He spoke in High Varelian, the language of the court, flowing and musical. He welcomed her back to the land of the living. He said they were beginning to worry she had actually managed to die in that dirt-hole cave. Illyra pulled against the binders. The magnetic field whined, locking her wrists tighter. She spat at him, reverting to the coarse trade tongue she had learned in the lower city. She asked where Dale was. Vorian paused. He looked at her with genuine amusement. He switched to English, the clumsy, flat tongue of the humans, mocking her accent. He asked if she meant the dirt-born male, the mechanic. Illyra's heart hammered against her ribs. She remembered the cave. She remembered the transfer. She had poured her life into him. She had felt herself fade. If she was here, and alive, that meant the marshals had taken her. But what of him? Vorian stepped closer, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. He whispered that the human was dead. He said they scanned the cave. They found a corpse and a comatose princess. He said it was pathetic. Really, she threw away her birthright, her dignity, and her blood for a creature that likely did not even know how to wash its own hands properly. Illyra closed her eyes. Grief, sharp and absolute, sliced through her. She had saved him. She was sure of it. But if the marshals had arrived while he was still recovering? Vorian straightened up, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his robe. He told her to save the weeping. She had a destiny to fulfill. He said they were in geostationary orbit. In 1 hour, the transfer would be complete, and she would finally be useful. He turned to the 2 heavily armored Praetorian guards standing by the door. He ordered them to take her to the observation deck. He wanted her to watch the planet burn once they broke orbit. The guards moved forward, unsealing the chair but keeping the magnetic cuffs on her wrists. They hauled her up. Illyra stumbled, her legs weak, her core energy dangerously depleted. As they dragged her out of the detention cell and into the vast, echoing corridor of the ship's hangar bay gantry, Illyra looked at the floor. She felt hollow. The mechanic was gone. The lonely man who had looked at her and seen a woman, not a weapon, was dust in a cave. She let them drag her. She had no fight left. 200 miles below in the upper ionosphere, the corpse was flying a shuttle. Dale Kessler was very much alive, though he felt like he had been chewed up and spat out by a trash compactor. His side, where the metal shard had been, was smooth and unscarred, but his mind was reeling from the residual energy of the resurrection. He felt buzzed, hyper-aware, his nerves singing with static. He gripped the yoke of the rust bucket, a heavy-lift orbital shuttle that Brax kept for customs evasions. The ship was shaking violently as it punched through the final layer of atmospheric turbulence. Beside him, strapped into the co-pilot seat, Brax was screaming. The Wike smuggler was punching coordinates into the nav computer with one hand and holding onto the panic bar with the other. Brax yelled that this was suicide. He shouted that Dale was insane. He said that it was a Dominion heavy cruiser. It had particle shields. It had point defense lasers. It had a hangar bay filled with people who killed for a living. Dale didn't look at him. He stared at the targeting reticle on the heads-up display. He locked onto the massive heat signature hovering in the black void above them. He told Brax to shut up and divert all power to the forward deflectors. Brax cursed, a long string of colorful metaphors involving Dale's ancestors. But he did it. He rerouted the life support and the comms power to the front shield. Dale pushed the throttle to the stop. The shuttle groaned, the engines flaring blue-white. He said they weren't going to hail them. They weren't going to ask for permission to dock. Brax asked what the plan was. Dale gritted his teeth. He said he was a mechanic. When a bolt was stuck, you didn't ask it nicely to move. You hit it with a hammer. He was the hammer. The cruiser loomed ahead, a sleek, predatory dagger of silver metal against the star field. The hangar bay was open, a glowing blue rectangle of magnetic containment fields protected by a shimmering energy shield. Dale aimed the shuttle directly at the center of the blue rectangle. The cruiser's proximity alarms must have screamed, because the point defense turrets swiveled. Green bolts of plasma lashed out, streaking past the shuttle's cockpit. One clipped the port wing, shearing off the stabilizer. The shuttle spiraled. Dale fought the stick and sweating, his eyes wide. He shouted for Brax to brace for impact. He did not slow down. He accelerated. The shuttle slammed into the hangar's energy shield at Mach 2. The physics of the impact were catastrophic. The shield flared, overloading instantly under the kinetic mass of the shuttle. The rust bucket punched through, its hull stripping away like paper, turning into a flaming meteor of debris. It skidded across the polished deck of the hangar bay, carving a trench of molten metal through the floor. Sparks showered 50 feet into the air. TIE fighter racks were crushed, fuel lines ruptured. The wreck slammed into the far wall of the hangar with a sound like the planet cracking in half, finally coming to a halt in a cloud of steam and fire. High above on the gantry walkway, Illyra and her guards were knocked off their feet by the shockwave. Illyra hit the railing, gasping. The entire ship shuddered. Alarms began to wail, a rhythmic, deafening klaxon. Below, the hangar was a chaotic inferno. Fire suppression foam was spraying from the ceiling, misting the air. Illyra looked down at the burning wreck of the shuttle. Her heart stopped. She knew that silhouette. She knew that reckless, stupid flying style. The cockpit hatch of the twisted shuttle was kicked open from the inside. It flew off its hinges, clattering across the deck. A figure climbed out. Dale Kessler emerged from the smoke. He was covered in soot. He was holding a massive, stripped-down rotary cannon he must have ripped from the shuttle's mounting. He looked like a demon dragged out of hell, furious and terrified and absolutely unstoppable. He raised the cannon and fired a warning burst into the ceiling, shattering lights. He screamed her name. Illyra pulled herself up to the railing. She stared down at him, her mouth open. Tears, hot and fast, spilled over her cheeks. She screamed back. She called him an idiot. She gasped, choking on the smoke and the sheer, overwhelming relief. She yelled, asking him if he had a death wish. She asked him why he came. Dale looked up. He saw her on the gantry. He saw the guards scrambling to their feet, reaching for their shock pikes. He grinned. It was the wildest, most beautiful smile she had ever seen. He shouted that he promised. The two guards on the gantry lunged for Illyra. Dale didn't hesitate. He swung the rotary cannon up. He didn't aim with a computer. He aimed with the instinct of a man who used to shoot desert rats off his back porch. The cannon roared. Heavy armor-piercing rounds chewed through the railing, forcing the guards to dive for cover. Dale dropped the heavy gun, it was empty, and sprinted for the access ladder. Illyra didn't wait to be rescued. She looked at the magnetic cuffs on her wrists. She looked at the chaos below. She felt the proximity of Dale, and the connection between them flared back to life. It was not the life-draining torrent of the cave. It was a steady, rhythmic hum of shared adrenaline. She closed her eyes and pulled. She drew energy not from herself, but from the ambient electricity of the ship's damaged grid. The lights in the hangar flickered. With a primal scream, she snapped her wrists apart. The magnetic cuffs shattered in a burst of violet sparks. The guards rose, raising their weapons. Elira thrust her hands forward and a pulse of telekinetic force hit them like a battering ram. They were thrown backward, tumbling over the railing to the deck 40 feet below. She turned and ran toward the ladder just as Dale vaulted over the top rung. They collided. It wasn't a hug. It was a desperate grappling, checking for injuries, grabbing faces, confirming reality. Dale was bloody, smelling of smoke and hydraulic fluid. Elira was cold, smelling of the sterile ship. He grabbed her face. He asked if she was hurt. She laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. She told him he crashed a shuttle. She told him he was the worst pilot she had ever met. He kissed her forehead, hard. He said any landing you walk away from is a good one. Then the door at the end of the gantry hissed open. A squad of Varelian enforcers poured through, clad in heavy assault armor, pulse rifles raised. Dale shoved Elira behind him. He pulled the magnetic pulse pistol from his belt, the one he had saved from the house. He told her they had to move. For the next 10 minutes, they were a whirlwind of violence and grace. They fought their way through the corridors of the Vanguard. Dale fought like a mechanic. He didn't trade shots. He shot out steam pipes to scald the attackers. He shot out door controls to crush them. He fought dirty, using his fists, his boots, and the environment. Elira fought like a queen. She moved behind him, using him as a shield while she gathered energy. When she unleashed it, it was surgical. She didn't just push. She reached into the minds of the attackers and pulled the trigger on their fear centers, making them hesitate just long enough for Dale to drop them. They were a perfect, terrifying unit. Earth grit and alien power. They reached the blast doors of the throne room. The metal was thick, engraved with the history of the Dominion. Dale checked the charge on his pistol. It was dead. He threw it aside. He looked at Elira. He was panting, blood from a graze on his forehead running into his eye. He asked if she was ready. Elira smoothed her torn robes. She wiped the soot from her face. Her eyes were blazing with cold violet fire. She said she wanted her throne back. She raised her hand. She didn't blast the door. She simply interfaced with the lock mechanism telepathically and ordered it to yield. The heavy gears groaned. The doors parted. They stepped inside. The throne room was a cathedral of glass and light, dominating the prow of the ship. Beyond the massive viewports, the curve of the planet below was a breathtaking blue-white arc. Vorian stood at the foot of the obsidian throne. He was not alone. Flanking him were not guards, but 3 humans in dark suits. Scientists. Corporate executives. The people who pulled the strings of the shadowy research labs on Earth. And behind the throne, suspended in a containment field, was a device that looked like a metallic heart, pulsing with a chaotic, unstable rhythm. Vorian clapped slowly. The sound echoed in the vast room. He stepped forward. He looked at Dale with a mixture of disgust and impressed disbelief. He admitted that the mechanic was persistent. Like a cockroach, Dale stepped forward, fists clenched. He told Vorian to step away from her. Vorian laughed. He gestured to the humans in suits. He explained the situation. He said there was no war. There was no invasion. This was a transaction. He revealed the conspiracy. The Dominion was crumbling. Resources were scarce. The regent, Elira's uncle, needed stability. Earth needed tech. The deal was simple. The Dominion would hand over the core, the very soul of their civilization, to these human researchers. In exchange, the Dominion would receive unlimited mining rights to the outer colonies, and the Earth government would recognize the regent's line as the sole legitimate rulers, backed by human military-industrial production. Elira was not a prisoner. She was the packaging. The core was inside her genetic code. To extract it, they needed to vivisect her. Elira stepped past Dale. Her voice shook with rage. She asked if he would sell their god for a mining contract. Vorian sneered. He said the core was a relic, a parasite. It held them back with its archaic rules about peace and balance. He wanted power. He signaled the guards. He told them to kill the human and restrain the girl. Dale moved to step in front of her, but Elira stopped him. She stepped into the center of the room. She looked at Vorian. She looked at the humans who looked at her like a lab rat. She closed her eyes. She whispered that if they wanted the core so badly, they could have it. She flared. It was not a controlled burst. It was a chaotic, suicidal expansion of energy. The air in the room turned freezing cold. Frost crackled across the viewports. The violet light from her tattoos became blinding, searing white. She began the overload sequence. Vorian's smile vanished. He screamed at her to stop. He shouted that she would kill them all. Elira didn't listen. She lifted off the ground, suspended in a vortex of psychic power. She was going to detonate. She would rather be a crater than a slave. She would take the ship, the traitor, and the secrets to hell with her. The scientists scrambled back, terrified. Dale shielded his eyes against the glare. The heat was intense, radiating from her like a dying star. He could feel her mind unraveling, preparing for the end. He shouted her name. She didn't hear him. The roar of the energy was too loud. Dale didn't run away. He ran toward her. He forced himself into the vortex. The energy tore at his clothes, burned his skin, but he pushed through. He reached up and grabbed her ankle. He yanked her down. He wrapped his arms around her waist, grounding her. He buried his face in her neck. He screamed into her ear. He told her no. He told her there was another way. Elira looked down at him, her eyes entirely white, void of recognition. She vibrated with the force of a nuclear weapon. Dale didn't let go. He focused on the one thing he knew she could feel. He thought about the garage. He thought about the quiet night by the wind turbines. He thought about his daughters. He thought about the way she looked when she fixed the toaster. He projected his love, not the grand storybook love, but the messy, stubborn mechanics love that fixed things that were broken. He shouted that they did not have to die to win. He told her to use him again. Elira blinked. The white faded slightly, revealing the violet irises. She saw him. She saw the man holding onto a bomb because he refused to let go of her. She hesitated. Dale seized the moment. He shouted at her to look at the ship. He told her to look at the systems. She was the heir. The ship belonged to her, not Vorian. He told her to merge, not with the core to destroy, but with the ship to control. Elira gasped. She understood. She stopped fighting the energy and started guiding it. She leaned into Dale, resting her forehead against his. She opened the conduit. This time, the connection was not a jagged stream. It was a river. Dale's mind merged with hers. He became the anchor, the stabilizer, the human earth wire that kept her from burning out. Together, they reached out. They bypassed the airlock controls. They bypassed the weapons array. They went straight for the ship's nervous system. The artificial intelligence of the Vanguard recognized the signature. It recognized the core. It recognized the Queen. Override authorized. The lights in the throne room turned from stark white to a deep, loyal purple. The gravity generators shifted. Vorian and the scientists were lifted off the floor as the artificial gravity in their specific sector was reversed. They flailed in midair, helpless. Elira stood on the deck, anchored by Dale. She spoke, and her voice was amplified by the ship's intercom, echoing in every corridor, every bunk, every bay. She declared that the command was hers. She looked at Vorian floating upside down, clutching at the air. She told him the deal was canceled. She turned to Dale. Her eyes were heavy, exhausted but triumphant. She collapsed against him, her legs finally giving out. Dale caught her. He looked at the containment field where the mock core pulsed. He looked at the terrified scientists. He keyed the comms on the nearest console. He spoke to the ship. He told it to lock all traitor personnel in the brig, and he told it to plot a course for the surface. The ship responded with a smooth, obedient chime. Dale looked out the viewport. The curve of Terra Nova was beautiful. He was bleeding. His ship was destroyed, and he was going to have a hell of a time explaining this to the local zoning board. But he was holding the hand of the woman he loved, and for the first time in 4 years, he wasn't lonely. He looked at Alira. He whispered that they were going home. The great ship turned slowly in the void, its engines firing not for war but for a landing. The desert did not welcome the Vanguard gently. The Dominion heavy cruiser, a vessel designed to intimidate star systems and blockade moons, was never meant to touch the ground. It was a creature of the void, built for silence and vacuum. When it entered the atmosphere of Terra Nova, it screamed. Dale Kessler held onto the navigation console of the auxiliary bridge, his knuckles white, his body braced against the G-force that felt like a giant hand crushing him into the deck plates. Beside him, Alira stood locked in a trance, her hands hovering over the holographic interface. Her mind merged with the ship's dying brain, fighting to keep the nose up. The heat shield failed at 30,000 feet. The armor plating began to peel away like burning skin. Dale shouted over the roar of the hull vibration. He yelled that she had to level it out. He shouted that if they hit the dunes at this angle, they would crack the planet's crust. Alira did not answer with words. She answered with a massive psychic shove that Dale felt in his teeth. The ship groaned, metal screaming in protest as the retro thrusters fired a suicide burn. The impact was not a singular event. It was a series of geological catastrophes. The cruiser clipped the top of the Iron Spire Ridge, shearing off its port engine nacelle in an explosion that turned night into day. It slammed into the deep sand of the basin, carving a trench 3 miles long. Glass shattered, bulkheads buckled. The world turned into a violent centrifuge of fire, sand, and tearing steel. And then, silence. It was a heavy, ringing silence that smelled of ozone and cooked sand. Dale coughed, waving away the acrid smoke that filled the bridge. The emergency lighting was flickering, casting chaotic shadows against the tilted walls. He checked his limbs, bruised, battered, but unbroken. He looked for Alira. She was slumped against the forward bulkhead, slid down into a pile of shattered conduit. The violet light of her tattoos was dim, flickering like a dying candle. Dale scrambled over the debris. He slipped on hydraulic fluid, recovered, and fell to his knees beside her. He touched her face. Her skin was cold. He whispered her name. Her eyes fluttered open. They were not the swirling nebulas of the Queen. They were just eyes, tired, frightened, relieved. She coughed, a dry, hacking sound. She whispered that she hoped he had insurance. Dale laughed. It was a raw, hysterical sound that hurt his chest. He pulled her up, wrapping his arm around her waist. He told her that his policy did not cover acts of interstellar war. They found the emergency airlock 10 minutes later. The manual release was jammed, fused by the heat of re-entry. Dale used a heavy pry bar he found in a damage control locker, putting his back into it until his muscles screamed. With a screech of tortured metal, the door popped open. They stumbled out into the desert. The suns were just beginning to rise, staining the eastern horizon in bands of blood orange and violet. Behind them, the Vanguard lay like a fallen titan, half buried in the sand, smoke pouring from 1,000 rents in its hull. It was a mountain of burning metal. They walked until they were clear of the heat radius, then collapsed onto the cool side of a dune. Dale looked at Alira. She was staring at the wreck. He asked her if it was over. She nodded slowly. She said Vorian was in the brig block. The impact would have been survivable there, but he was trapped. The Dominion fleet would be tracking the crash. They will be here soon. Dale looked at the horizon. He checked his empty belt. No weapon, no comms, no vehicle. He said they were sitting ducks. Then, he heard it. It was a sound he knew better than his own heartbeat, the high-pitched whining rev of a modified repulsor engine. A specific engine. One with a sticky intake valve that caused a distinct stutter at high RPM. He stood up, shielding his eyes against the glare. A skimmer was tearing across the dunes, kicking up a rooster tail of sand 50 feet high. It was not a military craft. It was a patchwork freighter loader, painted a garish yellow with welding scars across the prow. It was Brax's skimmer, but Brax was not flying it. The vehicle drifted sideways, executing a reckless high-speed slide that sprayed sand over Dale's boots, and came to a halt. The canopy hissed open. Casey Kessler leaped out of the pilot's seat. She was wearing Dale's spare flight jacket, which was 3 sizes too big for her, and she looked furious. Behind her, Juna scrambled out of the gunner's well, holding a heavy wrench like a baseball bat. Dale stood frozen. He opened his mouth to yell, to lecture, to ask what in the hell they were doing here. Casey marched up to him. She did not hug him. She shoved him in the chest. She shouted that he was an idiot. She shouted that he told them to go to Mars. She asked him if he really thought they were going to go to Mars while he was fighting a spaceship with a crop duster. Dale looked at her. He looked at the skimmer. He looked at the absolute terrifying competence in her eyes. He smiled. He grabbed her and pulled her into a hug that lifted her off her feet. He grabbed Juna with his other arm. He told them they were grounded for life. Casey sobbed into his shoulder. She said she knew. She said she did not care. Alira stood a few feet away, watching. She looked like an intruder in the moment, a creature of silver and tragedy standing on the edge of a human family. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in the morning wind. Juna pulled away from Dale. She looked at the alien princess. Juna walked over. She did not bow. She did not flinch. She reached out and took Alira's hand. She said they brought water, and protein bars, and a first aid kit. Alira looked down at the teenager's hand. She squeezed it. She whispered, "Thank you." Casey looked at the burning ship in the distance. She asked what happened to the bad guys. Dale looked at the wreck. He said they had a disagreement about gravity. He turned to Alira. He asked what they did now. The Dominion would send a recovery team. The Earth government would send the military. They were standing in the middle of an international incident. Alira straightened her spine. She reached to the back of her neck, where the neural interface of the royal armor now stripped away, usually connected. She said she was done running. She knelt in the sand. She closed her eyes. The violet light of her tattoos flared one last time. Bright and painful to look at. She let out a low, resonant hum that vibrated in the air, harmonizing with the distant hum of the ship's dying reactor. She reached into her tunic and pulled out a small, crystalline lattice. It was not biological. It was a physical matrix, glowing with a terrifying, dense energy. The core. She had decoupled it. She gasped, slumping forward as the light left her skin, leaving it a matte, pale silver. She looked up at Dale, sweating, looking mortal and exhausted. She held the crystal out to him. She said she renounced her claim. She said the High Exarch was dead. Alira Varos died in the crash. She looked him in the eye. She told him to take it. She said he was the only one she trusted not to use it. Dale looked at the object. It was the key to a galaxy. It was a weapon that could crack planets. It was worth more than the entire solar system. He took it. He shoved it into the pocket of his greasy, torn coveralls, right next to a half-eaten roll of mints. He told her he would put it in the safe, behind the toaster. The political fallout was swift, loud, and entirely fabricated. 3 days after the crash, the Global News Network and the Varelian Diplomatic Corps issued a joint statement. They claimed that a rogue faction of extremists, led by a disgraced minor noble named Vorian, had hijacked a Dominion cruiser and attempted a terror attack on the Terra Nova colony. They claimed the attack was thwarted by local defense contractors and a catastrophic mechanical failure of the vessel. There was no mention of a princess. There was no mention of a corps. There was no mention of a mechanic who flew a shuttle into a hangar bay. The truth was buried under a mountain of redacted documents and non-disclosure agreements. The Dominion did not want to admit their heir had defected. Earth did not want to admit they had almost conspired with a tyrant. Peace was maintained by a lie. Dale Kessler did not mind the lie. The lie let him keep his house. 6 months later, the desert outpost had returned to a rhythm that passed for normal. The heat was still oppressive. The dust still got into everything. The customers still complained about the price of reputable parts. But things had changed. The shop was rebuilt. It was bigger now, constructed with salvage metal from the Vanguard crash site that Dale had acquired before the military cordoned off the area. The roof was reinforced with hull plating that could stop a tactical nuke, though Dale mostly just appreciated that it did not leak when it rained. Dale was working on a moisture evaporator in the main bay. He wiped his hands on a rag, listening to the radio. He felt eyes on him. He looked out the open bay door. A black sedan was parked across the street, shimmering in the heat haze. 2 men in suits were sitting inside, watching. They were always there. Sometimes they were Earth intelligence. Sometimes they were Dominion observers in human disguises. They watched the house. They watched the shop. They watched the girls go to school. They were waiting for Illyra to make a move. They were waiting for the core to surface. Dale waved at them with his wrench. The car window rolled up. He chuckled and turned back to the shop. In the back corner, where the heavy modification bay used to be. Casey was arguing with a fuel injector. She was 18 now, taller, with grease under her fingernails that refused to scrub out. She was trying to tune her sky bike, the new one Dale had bought her with the consulting fee Brax had paid him for a job they never spoke about. She threw a spanner on the floor. She swore, a word she definitely learned from Brax. She shouted that the timing was off. She said it stuttered every time she pushed the intake past 80%. Illyra walked out from the kitchen. She was wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt that said Terra Nova Racing Team. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She did not look like a princess. She looked like a local. But when she moved, she still had that fluid predator grace that made the hairs on Dale's neck stand up. She picked up the spanner from the floor. She walked over to the bike. She told Casey that the problem was not the intake. It was the harmonic resonance of the fuel fluid. Casey rolled her eyes. She said fuel did not hum. Illyra leaned over the engine. She did not use a diagnostic tool. She placed her hand on the manifold. She closed her eyes. A faint, almost invisible violet pulse rippled from her fingertips into the metal. The engine sputtered, then settled into a smooth, deep purr that sounded like a large cat sleeping. Illyra opened her eyes. She handed the spanner back to Casey. She said Varelian fuel injectors responded to intent. She told Casey she was driving angry. She needed to drive with purpose. Casey looked at the bike. She revved the engine. It roared perfectly, snapping to the red line without a single hesitation. Casey looked at Elira. She tried to fight the smile, but she lost. She said that was a cheap trick. Elira smirked. She said it was superior engineering. Juna walked in from the front, dropping her school bag on the counter. She walked past Elira and bumped her shoulder affectionately. She asked if they were still on for the movie tonight. She said it was a horror night on the vid stream. Elira shuddered. She said she did not understand human entertainment. She asked why they paid credits to be frightened. Juna laughed. She said it was about the thrill. Dale watched them from his workbench. He saw the easy comfort. He saw the way his daughters had built a circle around the exile, protecting her as fiercely as she had protected them. He felt a lump in his throat. He swallowed it down with a sip of lukewarm coffee. He walked over to them. He wiped the grease from his forehead. He asked if anyone was going to help him mount the suspension on the hauler, or if they were just going to stand around using magical alien powers to cheat at mechanics. Elira turned to him. Her eyes caught the light. They were bright, clear, and happy. She said she was technically a consultant. She said she did not do suspension work. That was labor for the dirt-born. Dale laughed. He threw a rag at her. She caught it out of the air without looking. That evening, the sun set in a blaze of glory, painting the desert in shades of bruised purple and gold. The house was quiet. The girls were asleep, or pretending to be, while the horror movie credits rolled on the screen. Dale walked out to the back patio, past the rebuilt wind generators. The air was cooling rapidly. He found Elira sitting on the edge of the retaining wall, her legs dangling over the drop-off that led down to the mechanic's pit. She was watching the stars emerge, one by one. He sat down next to her. He did not say anything for a long time. He just listened to the wind and the steady rhythm of her breathing. He took the roll of mints out of his pocket. He offered her one. She took it. She popped it into her mouth. She said she still thought it tasted like chemical coolant. Dale ate one. He said it was an acquired taste. He looked at her profile. She was staring at a specific star, a bright blue point of light in the southern quadrant, the Varelian home system. He asked if she missed it. Elira chewed the mint. She thought about the silver palaces. She thought about the silence of the court. She thought about the weight of the armor she had worn for 20 years. She shook her head. She said she missed the architecture. She said the ventilation here was terrible, but she did not miss life. She turned to look at him. She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm. The connection between them was closed. She kept her psionic barriers up to avoid overwhelming him. But the physical touch was electric enough. She looked at the scar above his eye, the one he got from the Vanguard crash. She traced it with her thumb. She asked him if he regretted it. The crash. The cover-up. The fact that he could never leave this rock because the intelligence agencies would shoot him if he tried. Dale looked at the house behind them. He saw the blue light of the vid screen flickering in the living room. He saw the silhouette of Casey's bike in the garage. He looked at the woman sitting next to him. The woman who had given up a galaxy to sit on a concrete wall in the middle of nowhere with a grease monkey. He squeezed her hand. He said he was a mechanic. His job was to fix things. He said for a long time, he thought he was broken. He thought the girls were broken. He thought the whole world was just a pile of scrap waiting to rust. He looked her in the eye. He said he didn't regret a second of it. Elira smiled. It was the smile from the cave, the one that was just for him. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. The twin suns were gone now, leaving only the twilight and the rising moons. She whispered into the silence. "So what happens now, lonely mechanic?" Dale kissed her forehead. He smelled the ozone of her skin and the mint on her breath. "Now," he said softly, "we live." They sat there as the night took the desert, two fugitives hiding in plain sight, watching the universe turn above them, unafraid of the dark.